Hey, I'm Tommy Ellison, and this is Senior Moments. I can't tell you what I had for breakfast this morning, but I remember every detail of that time I came this close to being suspended my senior year in high school, just 3 weeks before graduation. So stick around. This is proof that some things from a misspent youth just don't fade away. Let's go. Well, good afternoon. It's Senior Moments, and it's live at 5. And I do appreciate you being on camera with us today. Or actually, you're not on camera, are you? You're just hanging around on the internet, whether it be YouTube or maybe, what's the other one? Oh, Facebook. Speaking of senior moments. Yep. Yes, Danny, I know it's 5 o'clock. I was actually a few seconds early, I think, on the standby. So thank you for reminding me. You're always good at keeping me humble. And anyway, the episode today, by the way, thank you for joining in. I appreciate it. This is episode number 23, and it's actually entitled "My Dream Job Became a Nightmare." And I'll get into the weeds on that in just a moment. But I had an interesting, actually last 2 weeks, I was in Phoenix, Arizona for a big national meeting of one of my main vendors in my real job. I'm a gymnasium flooring contractor. And we had a meeting at the the Arizona Resort and Spa, which is a big, nice, really very, very nice place. But my purpose in bringing it up was to say that I had, we were right across the street from Turning Point's national headquarters. And of course, it was just covered up with flowers and cards and balloons of people paying homage to Charlie Kirk there just before, that was a few days before the actual memorial service that they had in the football stadium. And if you saw that memorial service, you cannot have watched that without being moved by the testimonies that were given there and the love of the people. They didn't burn any buildings. They didn't attack any policemen. They just loved everybody. And it was a great example and a testimony to Charlie Kirk and his life and his message, and of course his martyrdom on bringing the message to college campuses and other places where he was. So anyway, with that said, I was just got back this morning from a magician's convention, which is kind of an interesting place if you've never been to one, and perhaps you haven't. It's where magicians kind of convene, get together and swap licks, as it were, telling war stories and teaching each other tricks, and they have shows and actual magic dealers that set up booths and sell their wares. And so I was just about to get out when a friend of mine drugged me over to one guy's booth, and I wound up spending $100 on some new magic tricks, and maybe I'll be doing those in the immediate future. But nevertheless, why don't we get started on today's theme? And that was my dream job actually became a reality. And I think I'm on the wrong camera is what I'm on. Let me look at something right quick. There we go. That's the one I want right there. Okay. As I said, the episode title is "My Dream Job Became a Reality." And I guess I've always been an Alabama fan, for years, and I'll tell you how I got there. And for those of you who are not in Alabama, I hope this will make sense to you. But ever since my childhood, we used to get together and play tag football in the yard, especially at my grandmother's house on Thanksgiving. And as you know, or maybe not, probably those of you who live in Alabama know this, that on Thanksgiving weekend, there's always one big game. We call it the Iron Bowl that's played here in Alabama, and it's between Alabama and Auburn. And my grandmother's had and grandfather had 10 kids, and so there was this, and they were all Catholic, so you know what that means. There was just a multitude of first cousins that were always out in the yard playing. And so we used to divide up teams, like kids do, to have, one team versus the other. And being that there was so many of us, we would get to choose on whose team we wanted to be. And I always, really wanted to be on Alabama's team because it just seemed to me like they always won. And Auburn never seemed to win the Iron Bowl. And this, I'm going back to like 1950s, late 50s, early 60s, when we were all getting together at Grandma's and playing football and, choosing up sides. And in my mind, because Alabama always won, well, I didn't want to be on a losing team. I wanted to be on Alabama's team, which kind of leads me into the story. Being a voracious Alabama fan, my dream job was to get a job as a Coca-Cola vendor at Legion Field. And, you would go to the game and sell Cokes and make money. And more importantly, watch Alabama play in person. Now, back then, Alabama played 3 or maybe 4 of what they call their home games in Birmingham. They didn't play hardly any games at what we now call Bryant-Denny Stadium. And Auburn, eventually went to a home and home where Auburn would play their annual, well, I guess it would be semi-annual. Every other year, Auburn would be the home team, and they wanted to play at Sugar Jordan Stadium. And Alabama eventually switched to where they were playing their games at Bryant-Denny, and Legion Field was kind of left out in the cold. And so, as you know, the Iron Bowl was the big finale of the season. But, beyond that, my dream job, as I said, was to get a job when they were playing at Legion Field, selling Cokes in the stands. And I had an ulterior motive. But here was the deal. I wanted to watch the football game and, sell a few Cokes. And, of course, that's not exactly what the business plan was, but that was my idea of why I would do that. Now, there was a process that you had to go through when you suddenly decided you wanted to go to Legion Field and sell a Cokes. You had to get there about 9 o'clock, or really earlier than that, probably 8 o'clock, maybe 7 if it was an afternoon game. And you would stand outside this big, tall chain link fence of a gate, and you would kind of sit there and, try to look like you were capable of putting, 2 feet together at the same time and, be smart and be chosen by the guy on the inside as to be on the crew that would actually sell these Cokes. And so the Coke man, as I guess he was called, he would point to kids, and some of them he already knew. He had hired them before, and so he knew they were trustworthy, or perhaps he knew they weren't, and so he wouldn't pick them. But a friend of mine had told me that if you get there early enough and you can get picked, then you're the guy that goes inside and starts selling the Cokes and, making some money and watching Alabama play football versus whomever they were playing that day. So that was the plan. But I had a bit of a reality check because I was chosen, but in lieu of selling Cokes in the little wire racks that they put them in with the lids, my dream, was to sell those. But instead of selling in the stands like I wanted to do so I could watch the game, I was sent to this back room in this dark corner of the stadium, and that's where guys were preparing those trays of Cokes and putting on the caps. And guess what? My job that day and for several other times I did it, was to put plastic caps on the cups and then stack them in the wire trays, stack the wire trays and get them ready to be distributed to the guys that were kind of doing my job, or so I wanted it to be my job. But the reality of it was, we stayed in that room. There was no television. I think there was maybe a little transistor radio that somebody had brought so they could kind of keep up with the game. But we never saw a single down of football on those days that we were working in there. And needless to say, I was very disappointed. I couldn't even hear the game inside the room where we'd hear cheers, but as far as any type of narration to the game, all we had was that little transistor radio, and of course the crowd noise was many times so loud that you couldn't even hear what the radio was saying. And I spent numerous hours just capping those drinks while the others sold them in the stands. So, well, you know what? I lied. I lied. There was a time or two when we were able to, walk out into the breezeway for a break from what we were doing, and we could sneak a glimpse of the field and the teams on the field. But I swear, it seemed like every time I had the opportunity to actually go out and see the team on the field, they would call a timeout. And, our break was only like, 30 seconds long, it seemed like. And we had to go back to work. And of course, timeout would change to play again. And we never, I don't recall ever seeing an actual executed play on the field while we were doing that. And, I don't know if anybody else did that. I'm seeing where Willie Bice, he was in the stands selling Cokes. Willie was an old buddy of mine from Fairfield High School. You're the lucky guy, Willie, because I never got to see him. Now the pay, if I remember correctly, was pretty good. It seemed like we made like $20 for a day's work. And of course, in the early 70s and 60s, really more like the 60s, that was pretty decent money. I mean, we were picking up Coke bottles and selling them back to the A&P for 3 cents a piece. That was work. But, being in that situation, $20 for 4 or 5 hours worth of time, spent was darn good, But in my mind, it really wasn't worth, missing the whole game. Now, I will share this with you. My first real Alabama game as a spectator was with my Uncle Bobby. And he was a medical student, I believe at the time. He was somehow connected with the UAB hospital, which back then it was called University of Alabama Extension Center, but there was a medical school. And my Uncle Bobby had somehow managed to secure a couple of tickets, and in the process of doing so, he asked me if I wanted to go with him to see an Alabama football game. And so we went to, I believe, what was the Alabama Vanderbilt game, and it was there at Legion Field. And our seats were, if I recall, they were on the front row of the upper deck. And when the wind blew, you could kind of feel that deck swaying a little bit in the wind, like during and you had to be real still. And here's what I noticed at first: it was during the national anthem, and everybody's still and solemn and quiet, and the band's playing. Of course, they're a mile and a half away down on the field, and the band's playing, and you could feel with the wind blowing a little bit, not a lot of wind, but you could feel that upper deck starting to sway, which, kind of unnerving. You think about the bad side of something like that, falling, and, well, I don't have to tell you what that would have happened or what it would have caused, but, and later, in the paper I read that there were some structural concerns about that upper deck, and they had to put some additional bracing in and kind of shore it up. So I'm not sure, but I know it was a great game. If I remember correctly, Alabama won, and anyway, that was a long time look, kind of reflecting back into the past. I'll get it. Full coat teeth. Past, at a what I considered was gonna be a dream job that actually turned into a nightmare. Let me get a few comments up here. Again, I mentioned earlier, Willie Bice said he was in the stand selling Cokes, but then he followed up with, he said, I sold my Cokes for 20 cents, making a nickel on each Coke in addition to the regular pay. So, I never got that far into the equation, Willie, because all I was doing was putting caps on the Cokes you were selling, and it looked like you were, what would you call that? Scalping them for another nickel or dime to make a little more money. It looks like over and above the regular list price of the beverage. So I don't know. We've been here. I talked about that. I talked about the episodes in the underneath the stadium. Legion Field today is basically just a shadow of its past. Some people actually refer to it as a white elephant, and for a while it was used for high school games, but most of the high schools now have built their own stadiums on campus, and I see some soccer games going on as well. But it just kind of sits there. It's owned by the Park and Rec, and it's kind of sad because there are a lot of great games played in that stadium. There were a lot of games that I'd like to forget about. So Willie just commented that the guys might have been selling or buying the Coke to mix them up a little bit. Yeah, no doubt, on a cold day. I can remember going to a Notre Dame game, and I don't know how I got this ticket, but it was right in the middle of the Notre Dame section. And first time I ever drank peppermint schnapps was at that game, and it was cold, and I don't really drink anymore. Well, I don't drink anymore, but even when I did partake a bit, it was something that kind of warmed your tummy. So Danny Evans says, no, you're kidding. I don't know what you're referring to, Danny. Are you kidding about the drinking? I don't know. It wasn't much, believe me, but it was kind of an adventure. And I'm gonna cut you off from coming on with comments, Danny. So be quiet. Don't go into too many of the secrets, okay? Danny and I were best friends in high school. Anyway, that senior moment about the dream job never really matched up with the dream. And sometimes what we long for isn't quite what it seems, is it? I don't believe that sometimes the things we dream actually pan out, but then sometimes those dreams come true, and so who's to say? But sometimes we long for what isn't, and what it seems, I guess. But those dreams that we have, they're kind of like, well, let's just put it this way. Life is a lot like that, like a football game. It's one day, or maybe you could say one play at a time. And I'm thankful for every extra breath every extra day I get as my hair turns grayer, which you can't imagine it being much grayer, but nevertheless, it's still in there, so that's good news. And got a few more comments here. It says, my sister chimes in. She says it's very good in hot chocolate. I think she's talking about the peppermint schnapps. And, and she's actually talking to my friend Danny. So, Danny, my sister says, hey there, I remember you. It'd be interesting to know exactly what it is that she remembers about you, Danny. But nevertheless, I got to bug out of here. I've got a meeting tonight at church, and I would love to keep going, but I have got to kind of hit the road here again and go see some folks up at my church, the Baptist Church at McAdory. But I appreciate all of you who are tuning in and those of you who are watching on the replay. And if you would, remember that I come live at 5 every Sunday evening, and I appreciate you tuning in and watching today. And if you're watching on the replay, be sure and leave a comment if you would. And this guy that's coming up in just a second, he's a pretty handsome fellow. I want you to pay attention to what he says and try to follow directions if you would, because he's got some good information here for you that I would appreciate you responding to. Great having you online today, guys. Willie, Danny, Anna. I hope you have a good Sunday afternoon, and we will see you next week on Senior Moments, Evidence of a Misspent Youth. Well, hey, thanks for spending a few minutes with me on Senior Moments. If you enjoyed the ride, be sure and tap that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. I'll be back soon with more stories from a misspent youth, and maybe some of yours too.